What's up guys, my name's Seth, you're watching Petrol 360, and today we're going to be downgrading axles in my F100. Alright guys, so we're working on my 1966 Ford F100 short bed. I picked this truck up a while back and I'm slowly building it into a really nice daily driver. Nothing crazy, so one of the things we're doing is upgrading all the drivetrain. That means a 5-speed swap, as well as swapping out the rear end. So a lot of people would say that switching to a Ford 8.8 from a Ford 9-inch is a downgrade, but there are a lot of reasons to do it, and it's going to be a lot cheaper for me to do it. So a lot of guys would say that swapping from a Ford 9-inch down to a Ford 8.8 would be a downgrade, but in my case, it's actually going to be an upgrade, or pretty much even, but I'm going to get a lot more benefits and save a ton of money in doing so. Okay guys, and the first reason for swapping out is this right here. I've got an adapter on here. The previous owner used this adapter to use a factory Crown Vic wheel on this axle. So the F100 comes from the factory with a 5x5.5 bolt pattern, whereas the Crown Vic front end is 5x4.5. So it's a smaller bolt pattern and they don't match, so you have to have mismatched wheels to make it work out, or adapters to make everything fit. So the second reason for the swap is the actual brakes themselves. Obviously, the truck came with drum brakes. The axle we're going to be using is from a Crown Victoria. It's a Crown Vic 8.8 and it comes with factory disc brakes. So that's going to be a big upgrade, and it's going to match the brakes in the front end, which is going to make my master cylinder work better and my brake feel better. So that in itself is reason alone just to swap everything out. The next benefit is the diff. So this diff is a 355 gear ratio and it is open. So you know, I've only got one wheel peel taking it down the road, which isn't a huge deal. Again, this isn't a race truck or anything like that. I'm probably never going to drag race or anything, but I live kind of out in the country, so I'm driving in grass and gravel a lot, so having a limited slip diff will be a super nice upgrade. Another reason it makes sense for me to do this swap is because I'm going to do an axle flip. So what you do for an axle flip is where you see the axle is mounted below the leaf spring. I'm going to mount it on top of the leaf spring, and that's why we had to put C-notches in the frame, because as you can see, we're not going to have enough clearance here. And this effectively lowers the truck, almost 4 or 5 inches. So it's a really quick, easy way to lower the truck and get the stance where you want it. But first, I'm going to knock off these wheel spacers. They're adapters, and I'm going to keep those because I've got enough trucks laying around that I'll probably use them again one day. But past that, we're going to try and rip out this whole rear end. So next we need to disconnect the emergency brakes as well as the hydraulic brakes. So you can use the stock brake pull as well as this handle for your 8.8, and this is a really simple setup. It's a mechanical advantage lever and it will work with the new setup. So we want to keep all of this, but we can get rid of everything else, and I'm going to keep all of the stock brakes with the axle so that whoever buys it next, if they need this, they've got it. Just makes it a little bit easier to sell, because I am trying to sell the rear axle, recoup a little bit of the cost. They're not worth a ton, but every little bit counts. Well, I tried not to do this, but this nut is stuck to the original line, so I put some heat on it and I wasn't able to get it free. You can see where I used some pliers to keep it from spinning, but guess we're just gonna have to reflare that. That's all right. Alright, so I moved my jack stands from underneath the axles to back here underneath the spring hanger. It is a little tippy. I definitely don't like doing this, but you know, I've got to take weight off the axle. I am keeping a little bit of pressure with the jack on the axle so it won't drop. Again, the axle is mounted up underneath the leaf spring, so there's nothing that's going to keep it from falling on the floor. So a little bit of up pressure so it doesn't, and we should be good. So I'm going to break off these U-bolts and go from there. Easy enough. Oh, I also hit all this with PB Blaster when I started, just so they can be soaking up a little bit. Sometimes these can really be stuck on there. But thankfully, the Mac got it done. Alright, well that actually came out extremely easily. I'm very surprised. But now that I've got them off, I'm going to do a couple things. First, obviously, just look over the spring now that I can see more of this side. Make sure there's no cracks or broken leaves. And these are the new spring pads I'm going to be using. So the new axle will weld on top of these. But I want to make sure it's going to fit on the nut itself. It will, and I don't need to cut this down anymore. It's not going to interfere with that, which is good. So these are going to work just fine, not needing modification. I am going to scuff this up and go ahead and paint it, because once I put the axle on, it's not coming back off again, whereas the rest of this I should have no problem painting. Past that, I believe this is, the bottom leaf is the load leaf. Whenever you put a ton of weight in it, it keeps it from sagging all the way down. I'm pretty sure it's still going to work even with the axle on top. I might actually look into that, but I'm going to leave it on here either way, honestly. But yeah, the other thing is the axle isn't going to fit through here, so I'm going to have to drop, I believe, the front of these leaf springs down and then bring the axle up and around. It's definitely harder to get it in than it was to get it out, but shouldn't be too big of a deal. Hopefully those bolts will undo really easily and we can go from there. But yeah, that part, super easy. Alright guys, go ahead and say a quick prayer that these bolts actually come out. I did hit them with some PB Blaster. So, and if you guys want to know, this is the kind of bolt you put anti-seize on, so you can get it out when you have to do it again. But look at the threads on this thing. Hopefully it's in focus enough. They have completely flattened out. This is what happens when you put the bolt back in and the holes aren't lined up. And you just beat it in as you squish all those threads. So this bolt is getting replaced. Alright, this is about as far as I'm going to get tonight, unfortunately. I went ahead and cut off these control arm mounts. You can see up under here I got everything smoothed out in case that's where the leaf springs landed, but unfortunately they're going to land a lot further inboard where the coil springs for the Crown Vic mounted up. So it looks like I'm just going to have to cut these. They're welded on either side. And I believe I have to cut a notch into the corner of this e-brake and original bump stop. So that's not too big of a deal, but that's going to stop me in my tracks. I could, you know, lift the axle up and put the leaf springs back on, but that's just going to give me a lot less room to notch all that. So no big deal, but yeah, that's going to be a job for another night. So a couple minutes for you guys will be a day or two for me. So we'll see you guys in a second. Alright, it's actually 2 days later than that last clip, and yesterday I went ahead and got the axle placed into the truck. There was more grinding and cutting I needed to do, really dirty, nasty work, so I put the camera up and just got going. So the truck is, or excuse me, the axle is now in the truck, so let me bring you guys up to speed and show you what I had to do. Alright, so like I said, got the axle in here, the U-bolts are in, the shocks or the springs are now bolted back into the frame, and so this is where I had to do my cutting. So this bracket right here is for the e-brake cable. It hooks in right here and goes across to the caliper, but the U-bolt wants to live in the same place. So I cut off, there was a side here, and there's also a big bracket that sits up above this. I cut that bracket off and cut off this edge so that my U-bolt can go. And this probably isn't exactly where it's gonna live because I haven't centered the axle or anything, but it's pretty much where it's gonna go. You know, may move up 1/4 inch or so. So from here, I need to weld across the top of this to get some more support in. This is not connected to the axle itself. So weld across there. The next thing I'm gonna be working on is brakes and get all those lined up. So I've got the original hard line over here. I'm gonna have to tee off to that. I've got individual brake lines that go to the calipers. There's no solid line that runs across the axle. And then from there, let's see. Oh, I got a rear sway bar to use. The factory rear sway bar will work, and I've got some brackets for that and everything. So we'll get that mocked up. But the one thing I can't do is weld the rear end onto the spring pads. I can't because I don't have the transmission in the truck right now, so I don't know how the motor is gonna sit because I need to set the pinion angle on this. So can't do that right now. It's gonna be a little bit before I can do that, but I can go ahead and get everything for this rear axle ready to go. Oh, in case you're wondering why I didn't have the camera out, this is all the dust that's on the floor. Actually, it's not. This is the second time I've swept the floor while doing this swap, so that just kind of gives you an idea. I'm also, I'm gonna drop it down on the ground real quick. I'm gonna throw the wheels on and just see how low this actually is. I believe I'm going to have to raise it. I have aftermarket spring hangers, and I think I can lift the truck up a little bit, and I may have to, so we'll see. Depends on how low I can get the front, but honestly, I'm gonna put this thing on the ground and just see how low it is. Alright, got it set on the ground, and holy smokes, it's low. It's lower than I thought it was going to be, but it's honestly the same height I want it to be. I want it to be low, but I don't want it to be stupid. Problem is,
Now the front end is quite a bit higher. So I've got to measure to see how much lower I need to get the front end and see if that is possible. If not, the back end's gonna have to come up, which is okay. But yeah, this thing's sitting really low. Axle looks happy in there. Cycle the suspension. I've got some clearance issue with one of the hangers for the e-brake cable, but once I get to mount the e-brake cable, then I'll get all that done. I'm also, my exhaust is now hitting the ground, so that needed to be sorted out anyway. What I might do while I have it is take the drive shaft for the Crown Vic and just run it up there to see how much clearance I have between these cross members. I feel like I may have to notch those and then reinforce them. So I'm gonna go grab that and we'll go from there. Alright, so stuff the drive shaft in there, and if it stays this low, it is going to be really close, but I may just be able to get away with it. The other thing is, I measured my rear bumper versus my front bumper, and I've got to come down like 4.5 inches in the front, which I don't think I'm going to be able to achieve. So I'm probably going to have to bring the rear up a little bit so it can match. Otherwise, I'll be doing a Carolina squat. That should give me a little bit more clearance on the drive shaft as well. The other good thing is I believe that I can still use this drive shaft. I think it needs to be shortened. So I measured, I've got a bell housing in there right now. It's not one I'm going to use, but I've got that in there to give me a face measurement, and then I measured how long the T5 is, and I've come up a little long on this drive shaft. So that's a good thing. That should mean that I can take it to a drive shaft shop, they can cut it and shorten it, and I can keep this aluminum tube. So that's where it gets expensive, is when they have to build you a whole new drive shaft. But I kept this one from the Crown Vic. I also have the one from the F100, so you know, one way or another I could get something to work, but since I already have this aluminum one, I'd much rather use that. So, alright, gonna take this drive shaft back out and go get my sway bar, see if I can get that mounted up. So this is the factory rear sway bar for the Crown Vic. This can pretty easily be put on the F100 frame. So I've already done this one before on my dad's truck, so just copying what we have. Stock bushings, the bushing mounts and everything, and these are just universal sway bar end links from I think eBay or Amazon or something like that. I think it was 10, 20 bucks for both of them. So we have to do a little bit of welding onto the frame, but that's pretty much it. So we'll go ahead and get this thing installed. Right here on the inside of the frame rail, on both sides is the original shock mount, so those are obviously not going to work anymore. So I banged out those rivets, got the brackets out, and now I'm working on the sway bar. So the sway bar itself is up underneath there, and I built these brackets. So these brackets here are going to sit up here on the frame, and they're going to get welded in. So right now I'm going to go ahead and scuff both sides, get them about where I want them to be, tack them in, then pull the sway bar back out of the way and fully weld them. Alright guys, bringing you back in. It's actually about a week since my last clip, so I'm not 100% sure where I left off, but we have brake lines installed. These are the flex lines. Went ahead and mounted or welded a tab onto here to hold these. These are the factory Crown Vic rear brake lines, and I decided to go up over the notch because the bed is going to be cut, and that seems like the best way to keep it out of the way of the axle and the suspension and everything. So it's not exactly what I want to do, but that'll work perfectly, and I don't really want to add another hole right here. Another thing we did was get these brackets welded onto the frame for the sway bar end links. So sway bar is on, brakes are on. I've ran some new hard lines, and the only thing I don't have is shocks because I started on it but didn't finish. So I got brackets tacked on to the bottom of the axle, but I wasn't sure on what I wanted to put up here. Since this is so low, obviously we can't run a standard shock. This is the shocks that came off the truck, and they just don't collapse enough. They're actually still good, so I'll save them for another project, but need to order some new ones. And this is what I got. Just went on Speedway. They literally call these short shocks gas black. So if you look up for short shocks, this is what pops up. They're pretty cheap. So got these coming. Now that I have these, I can go ahead and weld the upper mounts on now that I know exactly how this is all going to go together. The other key piece that I've been waiting a couple weeks for is finally here. Transmission time. So out of all the options I looked at, I had the bell housings and everything to run an aluminum bell housing that came from a Mustang, but I decided to go with an adapter plate, and here's why. With everything we have going on, I would need to modify the truck to take a cable clutch or modify the bell housing and transmission to accept a hydraulic clutch. Not a huge deal, but this adapter plate was going to be cheaper than getting all the transmission hooked up and clutch hooked up to the other bell housing. The other thing too is I'd have to buy a new starter as well, so just it kept adding up to make this adapter plate more of the ideal solution. So this is from Modern Driveline. It's if you give them a call, they've got all kinds of stuff to do T5s to older Ford bell housings. I called them up, told them exactly what I had going on, sent them pictures of this bell housing, and they recommended this one. And it took a little while. It took about 2.5 weeks to get this, but got it here in hand. It looks like a really nice unit. I wish their instructions were a little bit nicer, but you know, no pictures. Come on, guys, we're in the 21st century. You have a digital camera, you can take some pictures on how all this stuff's supposed to be and mark out which holes I'm supposed to drill and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, but I went ahead and painted the bell housing as well as the block plate while I had everything apart. And it looks like I've got to drill out some holes here in my bell housing and get those tapped as well. And yeah, we're going to work on this. I'm not going to show getting this transmission in again because I've never worked with that plate before, that adapter, and I want to make sure I do it right. And being up underneath the truck really won't be a very good video for you guys, but I just want to make sure I get it right because it's very expensive and annoying if I don't. All right, a few more days later, and got the bell housing fit up the transmission. Wasn't too terribly hard. You did have to add 2 holes to your existing bell housing and get those lined up and sunk in there for these 2 bolts on the inside here. So one there and one there inside of the original bolt pattern. And yeah, it went on pretty easy. What I'm doing now is checking the stick out. So see the input shaft hangs out just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch. So I want to make sure that that is going to seat inside of the crank and the pilot bearing. So I climb underneath the truck, check that out, then I'm going to pull this bell housing back off, install it into the truck with the block plate, wherever it is, right there, and go ahead and get the transmission bolted in there to worry about the cross member. This transmission is going to have to come back out. This is not the transmission I'm going to run. This is the bad transmission. I am waiting for the correct input shaft to put in the good transmission. I don't want to put this one in there because it might have some junk on it and mess up the other transmission. So just using for this for mock-up, and waiting on a couple parts. I do have new clutch sitting there, and I have a new flywheel and a bunch of other parts going for this, including a rear main seal and stuff. So waiting on all that stuff to come in, but I can go ahead and get this mocked up and work on the transmission mount. So get this stabbed underneath there and go from there. All right, guys, Rock Auto just dropped off a new flywheel. So this is our new one versus our old one. So I'm taking some measurements and making sure that this is a match for this. They're slightly different, but I think it's gonna be right. So I'm gonna check and verify that. And also have a new rear main seal. Figure while I'm in there, I'll go ahead and do that. I went ahead and installed a new pilot bushing. I went with a bushing rather than a bearing. After reading some comments and stuff, it looked like a bushing would be a little bit safer combination. May not last as long, but you know, that's up for discussion from everything that I read. So I'm gonna verify these, and then I'm gonna make sure the clutch mounts on here, and I'm gonna look online and see this is not smooth. It has a machined ridge in it. So I'm gonna check and see if that is okay. Or if this has to be machined, and I'll be really upset if this has to be machined. But anyway, I'm getting really close to final installing that 5-speed in the truck. Well, guys, I didn't film any of it, but clutch and flywheel and backing plate are on, so now I'm going to toss on the bell housing itself and see if I can get the transmission on tonight. That'd be the perfect goal for tonight. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the build. Now things are obviously looking different, so let me catch you guys up. So as you can see, we got the entire back half of the frame taken apart and painted. So I pulled out the rear axle. I decided not to pull leaf springs, wasn't really worth it, but sway bar and everything like that is off, and I went ahead and shot everything with gloss black. I painted it here in the garage because we've had a lot of rain the last couple of days, and it looks like it's going to continue to rain, so I really wanted to take it outside where I can lift it up a little bit higher and
this, that, and the other, but just didn't work out. So frame's all painted, everything came apart pretty good. I don't think there's too much that you guys haven't seen other than maybe the upper shock mounts. Don't know if I showed those. I thought about putting a Watts link in here, but I decided not to. Would have had to order some Heim joints and stuff, and it just seemed like a little bit more than what this truck is actually gonna need. So this morning what I'm gonna try to do is go ahead and get the axle back in and start reassembling. I've got the drive shaft out getting shortened right now, so as soon as that gets back, I should be able to toss this thing together, bleed the brakes, and get back to driving. So see if I can get everything tossed in there, right? And there you go. Whole rear end is more or less back together. Got everything painted, axle back in, the brake lines hooked back up. Got the sway bar installed, and I did get the e-brake cables. A couple issues there. The connector, the wire that goes into the shoe on this side is missing, so I think I'm just going to run one side for now. If that doesn't work, then I'll get a new hardware kit and rebuild this one. I do have another issue, which is my sway bar mounts are going to have some clearance issues with the leaves themselves. So I think I have enough room. I can cut those down and make them smaller so they won't interfere. And I think I'm gonna have to lift the truck back up. So I think those leaf springs are gonna move further away. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but I definitely wanna go ahead and address it. I also got bump stops installed in here. So whenever I'm towing stuff, go over a big bump, won't be an issue. But past that, rear end is essentially back together. Still waiting on the drive shaft. Got to get the drive shaft, got to fix that, and then I have to connect the e-brake cables to there, fill up the diff and the transmission, cut a hole in the transmission tunnel, and we should be ready to get this thing back on the road and moving. Past that, I need to work on getting this cab corner back in there and go ahead and replace that one, but I can do that once it's driving again because I really do want to get this thing moving under its own power. So I think that's probably where I'm going to leave this video. So thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one.